Mr. McGregor.
Lord Brady, the next witness is Mr. Iain Graham.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Graham. As you understand, we're about to be asked some questions by Mr. McGregor, who's sitting on my right. But first, will you take the oath? Just sitting where you are, if you raise your right hand, repeat these words to me. Swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth.
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now, I don't know how long your evidence will take, Mr. Graham. We'll probably, if it's not finished by 4, we'll probably break off then, with the possibility of spilling on a little further if your evidence is finished. But could I just say that if at any time you want to take a break, just tell me and we'll take a break.
Thank you.
Right. Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Graham, can you tell the inquiry your full name, please?
Iain Fraser Graham.
And you've provided a witness statement to the inquiry dated the 20th of April 2022, is that correct? And that will be found at pages 182 to 200 of the bundle. Now, Mr. Graham, the content of your statement will form part of your evidence to the inquiry. You're also going to be asked some questions today. If you do want to refer to your statement at any point, please do just let me know. If I could begin with your background and experience, which you begin at paragraph 2 of your statement. You indicate that you qualified as a chartered surveyor in 1989, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in 2015 you were elected as a Fellow of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. Now, you started your career working for Edinburgh City Council in the late 1980s. And then after that you moved into the private sector.
Correct.
So in the 1990s, you indicate that you worked for a property consultancy firm on a range of projects, including in the education sector. Can you just provide the inquiry with a broad overview of the types of project that you were working on at that point in your career?
The education sector, the prime one was the new Edinburgh's Telford College at Granton. I was the development manager for that. I was seconded into the college to deliver that.
And you then tell us that you joined the NHS in 2007 as Head of Capital Planning and Premises Development, is that correct?
Correct.
And then you became Director of Capital Planning and Projects on the 1st of June 2009?
Correct, yeah.
And you've been involved in the project for the re-provision of the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and the Department of Clinical Neurosciences.
Correct.
Now, I'll just refer to that throughout as the project. Okay. So if I use the term the project, that's what I'm referring to. In terms of the 2 roles that you've had within the NHS, if we take firstly your role as Head of Capital Planning and Premises Development, what did that involve?
Both roles are very similar. It was just the reporting lines around them. But responsibility for delivering the board's capital projects across Lothian, the governance aspects of it, and making sure that we've got the team in place to support those projects.
And just so I'm understanding you, in terms of whatever label we apply, whether it's Head of Capital Planning and Premises Development or Director of Capital Planning and Projects, was the rump of your responsibilities the same?
The rump, yes, absolutely.
So again, just in broad terms, you said something changed, you said your reporting line changed. Yeah. What changes from 2009 onwards?
My original post reported to the Director of Facilities, who then reported to an Executive Director. The Director role, I reported directly to a Board Director.
Okay, so from 2009 onwards, you're directly reporting to a Board Director. So am I correct in thinking, just in terms of the chronology, by the time that you join NHS Lothian, the initial agreement for the project, which was 2006, that's been completed.
Yes.
Has the outline business case, when the Children's Hospital was a capital project, has that been approved as well?
That was underway. The business case was being written at the time.
Right, okay. So if we think back to whenever you come into NHS Lothian, so you're coming in 2007, the business case is being developed for the capital project. Can you just explain to the inquiry, what are you doing on the project at that point in time?
At that time, I was supporting the project director, who was a clinical person at the time. We had a capital planning manager responsible for the building elements of it, and there was a project manager writing the business case. But the technical points, the building points at that point were preparing the schedule of accommodation and such like. So I was managing the team that were doing, or person and their resources that was undertaking that work.
Okay. So if I could ask you just to have your statement in front of you and to look at paragraph 3, please. So at paragraph 3, you state that you were providing, and I quote, support from a capital planning / built environment project management perspective. Do you see that?
Yes.
Whenever you're talking about a capital planning built environment, is it that sort of technical role that you're talking about in terms of technical aspects of construction associated with the build?
Yeah, capital planning is a mixture of project management and translating what a clinical requirement might be into building speed.
In simple terms, were you a sort of link or a conduit between various aspects of the project?
Yes, and being the link to board governance through reports to the directors and such like.
Okay. So again, just in your own words, could you explain really the interactions that you're having at this point in terms of granular work that you're doing and then how you would be reporting that up the chain of command?
So the detail of it would be regular discussions with the project team, be it the capital planning manager or project director, about the next steps, what was going into the business case, what gaps we had, how we were addressing things like gateway reviews, etc. Engaging with the project sponsor, SRO, Senior Responsible Officer, through either monthly meetings or reports, and similarly reporting to our Finance and Resources Committee with an exception report, just updating on progress, etc.
Would you be engaging with external advisors?
We brought on advisors through Framework Scotland, and I was part of that process to procure them, but day to day they were managed on site by the project managers.
Okay. And then would the project manager report into you, and then you said, again, if I'm getting this correct, but you would then report into the Senior Responsible Officer, which I think also had other terms throughout the project. I can't remember them all.
Project sponsor.
Project sponsor, thank you.
Sometimes project owner.
I think just to make sure that at the outset we're just speaking the same language, you use a number of terms in paragraph 3 of your statement, and I'd like to just run through each of those and make sure that I understand them. So the first that you use is project sponsor. Who or what is the project sponsor?
The project sponsor is the executive director on the board, someone that reports directly to the chief executive, but also reports to the board of NHS Lothian, and is the owner of the project, accountable for the project to the board and the chief executive.
So at the point that you joined NHS Lothian, who was fulfilling that role?
Jackie Sainsbury.
And then you also used the term project director. What was the project director's role?
The project director was more of a hands-on role, and at this point was, as I said, a clinical person, so actually able to bring the clinical brief, the requirements of the service into the project, managing the team day to day, managing the business case day to day, engaging with the stakeholders, which for this project was a lot of people, a lot of different organisations from other health boards, parent council and such like.
And who was fulfilling that role, the project
Isabel
director?
McCallum.
So it's Isabel McCallum whenever you come into NHS Lothian, and did that change?
It changed. Brian Curry came into post. There was the need, as we were starting to get into the construction phase, for that expertise on the ground.
So a change whereby clinical person was originally doing it, and then a change is made. What was Brian Curry's background?
He's an architect.
So someone with a more technical background comes in for a later stage of the project. Okay. Now, you mentioned the terms that the NHS Lothian board and the executive directors. Can you just explain what they are? Are they the same thing or are they different things?
The board of NHS Lothian is a governance body. The legal entity is NHS Lothian Health Board, and is made up of executive and non-executive directors. The executive directors have the operational management responsibility through the chief executive, and a number of senior directors may be executive directors but are not board members. There's a little group of them that are board members.
Okay.
And they're all appointed. I think all board appointees are from Scottish ministers.
Okay. And if I can ask you just to look on the paragraph 9 of your statement, please. Do we see at paragraph 9 that you state that Lothian Health Board's role in the project was as the investment decision maker? Can you just explain what you mean by that term?
Yeah, that's a term that comes from, I think, the Scottish Finance Manual. It's just the corporate body that has overall responsibility in the sense of government and statutory obligations, etc.
Okay. So should the inquiry understand that within the chain of command that we've just discussed, there's people doing operational roles, and then there's ultimately the board, as in the board of NHS Lothian, and it's the board that's the ultimate decision maker in terms of the chain of command that you talk about within your statement?
Yes, and we quite often do engage with third parties by saying the board wants, and that's just the party that will be contracting with it.
Yes. And again, sorry to jump around, but if we could move back to paragraph 6 of your statement, where I think you really just cover off your views in terms of the governance structures. You say at paragraph 6, the system of governance in place at NHS Lothian for the project in the period up until the start of the procurement process was generally consistent throughout the early stages of the project development, with key pillars of governance being Lothian Health Board, one of its committees responsible for considering capital project business cases, the Finance and Performance Review Committee, Senior Responsible Officer / Executive Director Lead, and a project or programme board. You see that?
Yes.
Just to be clear, I think we've covered off a lot of those, but you mentioned that there's the Finance and Performance Review Committee. What was that committee, and what did it do?
It was a standing committee of a subcommittee of the board, made up of non-executive, chaired by a non-executive director, a number of other non-executives and executive directors with responsibility for, at the time, the board's performance in terms of health outcomes and performance, finance performance, but also all the financial aspects of revenue and capital. So they scrutinised the business case. They received updates from myself or others about the progress of projects, etc. and sought assurance from the executives that all was in order or challenged as appropriate.
And what was the project board?
The project board was effectively the committee that chaired by the senior responsible officer with the stakeholders that might either be part of the client groups, the clinical side, or key stakeholders such as other health boards, university, etc. And they were looking after the business case assurance process, making sure that everything, all the stakeholders had been taken into account, any views from outside, etc.
Did you
very much a communications tool as well with those groups.
Okay. Did you sit on the project board?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you some questions about the design and technical specifications for the hospital. The inquiries heard that those were produced by a group called the Reference Design Team. Does that phrase mean anything to you?
Yeah, I am aware of them, yes.
Okay. So what was the Reference Design Team?
That came in post the change to the revenue funded project, the NPD, and it was the group within the project team and advisors that was pulling together the reference design, including designers, our project managers, and the other key people party to the briefing.
Okay, so we'll come back to that then if the reference design team comes in for the revenue-based project. If we think back to whenever you come in and it's still a capital-based project, who's undertaking issues related to design at that stage in the project? My capital project manager led that piece of work. We procured through something called Framework Scotland, a principal supply chain partner, and they brought contractor and design team. And we also procured technical advisors, client-side professional services companies who were project managers, helping to pull together the briefing packs and specifications. Okay. So again, if we could just take that in stages. You mentioned that there's effectively a framework agreement, is that correct? Can you just explain to the inquiry what a framework agreement is, and then for this particular project, how one would actually go from just the framework to having an advisor in place?
Yep. For the first time, NHS Scotland procured through an open tendering process 5 companies. We went through quite an extensive exercise to whittle down contractors and design teams into these 5 parties who were called principal supply chain partners. And those 5 could then were on a set contract to do any capital project across Scotland on the same basis for any of the NHS bodies, such as NHS Lothian or Western Isles or whatever.
So effectively, in terms of the framework, was this companies that were pre-approved to do capital projects for the public sector?
Yes, pre-approved and contracted on a set of terms that were agreed and effectively a contract in place.
Okay.
And there would be an agreed form of construction contract for when it got to the construction stage of a project.
Now, there's a lot of terms that have cropped up in the statements, things like call-off contracts, mini-tendering. Can you explain in as simple terms as you can? You have the framework agreement. How, if you want to get one of the entities that's on the framework agreement, how do you actually do that in practical terms?
I'm going to have to use my hands, sorry. The framework is an overarching Scotland-wide basis. If any party such as NHS Lothian wanted to deliver a project, we would do a mini tender just to the 5. We issue what was called a high-level information pack, which was our outline brief, and the companies would tender against that, but that's tendering against their time that they would expend on the project. And they would be interviewed by us. We would have, to all intents and purposes, an interview process, and that would be scored for quality, and then a commercial element would be added, and the selected party would be the highest scorer on that basis. And we would do the same for advisors as well, the same process with that mini tendering.
And in terms of the mini tendering, again, this might be an oversimplification, but effectively there's a competition on things like the price, but the standard terms would remain the same because they're set by the framework agreement.
The price is set in the framework. It's the hours and time that varies.
Thank you.
And again, that's a simplification of it.
Yes. So if we hear terms such as mini competition, that's how we should understand it. So what then is a call-off contract?
A call-off we would use in the same way we would describe it as calling off from the framework. In order to call off, we have to do the mini tendering. There are, however, some UK and Scottish Government framework contracts, not Framework Scotland, where the parties on that, the companies on that are ranked, so you call off the first company or a company from it. You don't necessarily have to do the mini tendering exercise.
And you'd mentioned that that process was gone through for a principal supply chain partner. Yes. Again, can you just explain, we're still within the capital project, so who that was and what they were going to do?
So the successful PSCP, Principal Supply Chain Partner, was a company called BAM. So they're construction company, and the design and build contract brings the constructor and all the designers for delivering the project, and part of the Framework Scotland approach was to bring those parties on board early in the business case and then have a staged process, staged contract with them for each business case element. So they might come in at the initial agreement, and we would be engaging with a healthcare planner or a designer, an architect in the early stages, or they might come in later in the business case, in the development time frame, and bring engineers and a whole range of services in then. And we would work collaboratively with them to develop the documents and then the instruction to construct.
So you've told us in your evidence, and you outline it at paragraph 17 of your statement, that BAM are appointed as the principal supply chain partner for the capital funded project.
Yep.
Once they get appointed by way of the mini tender and the call-off contract, what are they doing? What services are they providing to NHS Lothian at this point in the project?
Initially, it would be the briefing stage of translating the information that we'd obtained from the clinical groups around what space was required to start developing into a coherent design, all the building blocks, if you like, in the right place, in area terms. So how many, for example, theatres we would require, and in what location, how many outpatient clinics we would require, how many bedrooms, etc. So the design team are collating that and translating that into their brief and drawings.
So whenever you say that they're helping with the design, are they providing architectural services?
Our architects and engineers, yes, okay. Principally.
So if we're talking about the design team, we're really talking about not just design in terms of doing drawings, but we're talking about architects and engineers for really a full service package.
it develops that absolutely. They're going from that concept in stages, getting, if you like, more focused on the detail as both time and business case moves on.
Now, we'll come on to talk about what happens when the revenue model comes in, but whenever BAM are in place, before there's a change in the funding model, how much work have they done on the design before there's a change in the funding model?
There was considerable architectural design done, and the engineering components that support that design were starting to be developed and written up into the detailed specification and design work.
And this is all taking place in what I think you describe in your statement as a design and build contract. Can you just explain again in simple terms, what do you mean by a design and build contract?
The responsibility and the risk for design and then construction are all under the control of the contractor. We do not directly control and brief the design team without the contractor being involved. So in a traditional contract, you might have the health board engaging an architect, an engineer, etc. They prepare the design from our brief, and then a contractor tenders it. The design and build, that is all integrated with the contractor.
So design risk sits with the contractor as opposed to if the other contracting parties, the health board, the health board.
Yes. Ultimately, the health board is preparing the briefing and the specification, and the contractor is taking that on board to develop.
Okay. So while BAM are working under that contractor, are you involved in the day-to-day development of the design, or is that for BAM to take forward?
The health board is involved in terms of guiding the clinical groups, doing that translation work between what the clinicians are asking for into what would be required in architectural terms or design terms. But the legwork has been done by the designers. Okay. At this point, Brian Curry would be on board, and he would be the day-to-day lead on that from the health board side of things.
Okay. So what input would either yourself or your team be providing?
They would be principally doing that process management, making sure everything happened in the right order, and making sure that any questions from the design team and contractor were responded to, and indeed ensuring that the contractor and designers moved things forward.
Okay.
Program.
Before I leave the issue of the design and build contract, you mentioned within your statement that the NEC 3 contract, and you mentioned that it's based on what you refer to as a collaborative or partnership approach.
Yes.
Can you just explain to those of us that don't work in that space, what do you mean by that?
It's easier to explain the traditional route and then the difference. The traditional bit where we have the design team working for the client and a contractor, it can be confrontational and issues can arise. The NEC contract is designed, I think it stands for National Engineering Contract. It's designed for all the parties to have no surprises. It's driven by programming, so a start date and end date and all activities from it. But the collaboration comes with the what's called early warning notices. If one of the parties identifies an issue, flag it, it's discussed and resolved, rather than left to the end of the contract where contractor asks for more money and the client says, we don't have it. It's more dealt with at the time in a collaborative way. Similarly, the design process is supposed to be more interactive and collaborative between contractor and designers.
So standard form contract whereby everyone knows where they stand, with the idea that parties work together rather than having partisan views on things.
Absolutely.
Now, again, can you explain why could that type of contract and type of approach not simply have been utilised whenever there was a change to a revenue funding model rather than a capital model?
Yeah. One of the aspects of the NEC contract we were using was the risk transfer and risk pot, it was called. We expected a target price to be agreed with the contractor at the time of contract being signed for construction. But that target price could vary depending on risks that emerged or risks that were addressed. And in an ideal world, you would end up with a share of any surplus at the end between contractor and client. But part of that process is it's an ongoing dialogue all the way through. In the revenue funded world, certainty is required and a contractor held to account to a price in a programme and a risk basis in order that the special purpose vehicle can get the contractor's warranties and guarantees and get the funders behind the loans to satisfy them as well. So the two approaches, the NEC framework approach is less certain as time goes on.
So again, just so I'm understanding you correctly, you couldn't really take an off-the-shelf standard contract like the NEC 3 and use it for a complicated multi-party situation for revenue funding where there's the special purpose vehicle and a whole host of other arrangements.
Yeah. There is one other related issue, which was under Framework Scotland, they're contracted to work for NHS Scotland and not third parties. So the third party would have to procure those individuals, those firms.
And you tell us within your statement that BAM were appointed in 2009. And if we could look to paragraph 17 of your statement, please. So 4 lines down in paragraph 17, there's a sentence beginning, the near completed design outputs. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So you say the near completed design outputs in the works information comes from the work, the PSCP, so is that BAM in this case?
Yes.
Has collaboratively undertaken with the Health Board's project team to develop the specification and requirements in the earlier stages of their appointment. So the project got to the stage that the works information stage had nearly been completed when the Scottish Government decided the project should proceed under the NPD model. Now, again, for the uninitiated, can you explain what do you mean by works information?
The works information is the specification, design and requirements that enable the contractor to fully price it and market test, as you know, as in go to subcontractors to get elements priced, so that there's an internal tendering process that the contractor would do as part of that. So the works information is what they're going out to the market with.
And at that stage, would that include technical engineering details having been started or completed? What stage would they be at?
It could be either, depending on the nature of the project, but the majority of it would be under development with, and again, coming as the design has developed into more detail. It's really a matter of timing as to when that works information is finally completed. I honestly can't remember off the top of my head exactly which elements were outstanding at the point.
The inquiry at the minute isn't looking at the detail of the specification at any particular point in time. That will come later. But again, just you say that the works information was nearly completed. Just as a generality, I think at this stage we're interested, if we were looking for technical engineering detail, would there be a blank sheet of paper, completely completed specification, or would it be somewhere in the middle?
It would be nearer the completed, but not quite.
Thank you. Again, just to try to drill into that, you say at paragraph 18, to get to the completion of stage 3 and the commencement of stage 4, target price is agreed between the Health Board and PSCP with a proportion of supply chain packages having been priced up. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, you're obviously using a benchmark in terms of stage 3 and stage 4, but could I just ask you to explain it again for those of us that don't work in the industry? Stage 3 and stage 4 of what process?
So stage 3 is the works information level, the agreement of that, and stage 4 is you're instructed to build. In order to transfer from one stage to the next, we have to agree that target price, that overall price for the works.
And how's the metric set in terms of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 and stage 4? Is that from the NEC contract or?
Yeah, it's from the overarching Framework Scotland contract, which in turn is based on the NEC contract, and it does refer back to, I think from recollection, it links back to the stages of design and construction work from the Royal Institution of Architects and that sort of thing.
Okay. So you've explained in your statement to this point that the work that's been done, and you then tell us that in November 2010, the Scottish Government announced that there's to be a change in the funding model, that it's to change from a capital project to a revenue-funded project. And you tell us that from that point on, Scottish Futures Trust become involved.
Yes.
Why did Scottish Futures Trust become involved?
They were the programme managers for the non-profit distributing model that was to be used.
And who introduced them to NHS Lothian?
I believe it was their chief exec to our chief executive, or through Scottish Government.
And again, just to try and understand the role that they had, was this an advisory role or was it a mandatory role?
It was an advisory role, but Scottish Futures Trust had responsibility for the overall programme, so they had objectives that they had to meet for Scottish Government in terms of programming. Scottish Futures Trust created the project agreement, which was to be used when we went out to tender. So we couldn't vary that without agreement. And then they also were the final party at financial close to say it's okay to proceed. And I think they also had a role at the Capital Investment Group as well for these projects.
And did they have an oversight role? You mentioned it at paragraph 21, for example, that they established what you refer to as key stage reviews.
Yes.
What were key stage reviews?
The key stage review was a milestone review by Scottish Futures Trust, and that was set up as the project developed. They developed the key stage review documentation in parallel with us, because we were one of the first acute hospitals to go through. So we had an allocated SFT associate director who went through the key stage review with us and then had it reviewed by someone else in Scottish Futures Trust. And that then went to the Capital Investment Group, and without a successful key stage review signed off by the Health Board as accepting all the points, we wouldn't be getting business case approval.
Did Scottish Futures Trust have any role in the design of the hospital?
Not directly, but they did do design review early on in their involvement to review all the technical aspects and project size and cost.
So you say that they're not directly involved in the design itself, but they have a reviewing function.
Absolutely.
But in terms of that reviewing function, was that reviewing the design in terms of the revenue side or in terms of the technical aspects of the design?
It was the output was focused on programming and cost, but in order to get to the programming cost, they had to have an understanding of the detail, and we did get challenges about bed numbers and healthcare planning type issues, and how the building would be serviced, etc.
So was they interested in the design at a fairly high level of generality as opposed to the real granular detail of things like technical engineering specifications?
My colleague, the project director, would probably be best placed to answer the detail of it, but in principle it was an overall assurance process.
Okay. And when you say your colleague, are you talking about Mr. Curry?
Yes, yeah. He would have led the detailed discussion.
If I could ask you to have a letter in front of you, please. It's within Bundle 3, Volume 2, and it begins at page 108. So this is a letter from a Donna Stevenson to you. Donna Stevenson, who was she and what was her role in the project?
Donna was the Associate Director from Scottish Futures Trust, who was allocated to be our reviewer from SFT.
Okay, so the letter of the 8th of December that we see, Bundle 3, Volume 2, page 108, that's a letter from Scottish Futures Trust to you, dated the 8th of December 2010.
Yes.
And if we look within that, refers to a meeting that had taken place and goes on to address a range of details. So, for example, paragraph 1.1 under project scope, you confirmed yesterday that NHSL's preferred option for meeting its clinical requirements is an integrated facility incorporating both the RHSC and the DCN in one building. You indicated that a check has been done to ensure that a building to cover both facilities can fit within the envelope of the footprint of the existing design for the RHSC. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, why was that an issue in terms of trying to see if you could squeeze everything in?
Because we had a very constrained site. We didn't have an open green field with lots of land available. There was lots of connection points needed to the existing Royal. So the description of footprint isn't about fitting into the building, it was in fitting on the site.
Okay, thank you. And then if we look on to page 109, please, paragraph 2 of the letter. There's a bold heading, interface with existing PFI contract. Paragraph 2.1, we agreed that SFT would start to assemble some of the key issues associated with consort in the existing PFI contract for further discussion with the Health Board. We understood these to include resolution of a car park land swap, the potential removal of soft services from the contract, decisions with regard to any potential time extension to the contract, and any reconfiguration of the contract required to accommodate the project. All of these issues potentially do not require to be resolved ahead of the start of the procurement of the new contract. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can you just explain in general terms what problems are being discussed here?
It's principally the issue that was created of putting a new revenue-funded project into a site which is under the control of an existing PFI contract, with the land control lying with that PFI party consort mentioned here. And some of the changes that were needed to allow that building to happen and more particularly to work as a clinical service at the same time as we were running the clinical service in the Royal Infirmary.
And Scottish Futures Trust are assisting NHS Lothian with those issues, is that right?
Yes, they were identifying the issues that they thought would come up and needing to be addressed.
And again, we'll come back and cover this, but does that include issues such as not having control of Car Park B, which was one of the proposed sites where the hospital would be built?
Yes.
And a requirement to do significant enabling works?
Correct.
If we could look on to page 110, please, to paragraph 3.6. It states, there is the option of concluding the existing PSCP arrangements and tendering the RHSC/DCN project using a traditional NPD DBFM procurement route, option 1. In that case, NHSL could provide bidders with an exemplar design to show the adjacencies, etc., which it has worked through internally, including with clinicians to date. NHSL will want to be satisfied from its legal advisors that, as was indicated yesterday, the existing framework arrangements can be concluded without penalty except for payment for work today. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now,
could I just ask, is there any way to zoom in on this slightly? Sorry. Okay. Thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
we can always print things off if required as well. So,
yeah, Times New Roman's never very easy to read. Thank you. Sorry,
please do just take it. Please do just take a minute to read. I just simply read it out to you, so please do take a minute to read that if that would be of assistance.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we see mention in there of an exemplar design. What's an exemplar design?
In procurement of a revenue-funded project up to this time, an exemplar design was used as I believe, as a test against the public sector comparator, it was called. So a design was prepared to say that's how much it would cost in capital terms, but it's a very high level design. It may include some of the key adjacencies and key aspects of the services to be provided with it, but it's not a detailed design in any shape or form, and it would then be used to compare with the PFI pricing mechanic that was offer that was coming in.
So exemplar design, quite a high level design?
Yeah, that would be my understanding. Yes.
Almost sometimes perhaps called a concept design?
Probably slightly beyond that, but okay. Certainly, not something that you could go and tender and build.
Okay, so if we have the exemplar design at a high level of generality, in what respects does a reference design differ from an exemplar design?
The reference design was taken to a further stage, and in general high level terms, the reference design allowed us, in the context of the relationship with the existing Royal Infirmary and PFI contract, allowed us to work out how we could build it, how we could get in and connect, etc., to the adjoining site. So from my point of view, there was an awful lot more addressing the constraints of the site on the reference design compared to the exemplar type approach. But the detail of, if you like, the insides of it, my colleague Brian would be much better talking through that.
Again, just so I'm understanding this, reference design is quite a detailed design, at least as compared to an exemplar design.
It allowed us to identify where the fixed points were and what the constraints were around the site. So how we connect to the Royal Infirmary, for example.
In your experience, is there a difference in terms of, for example, timescales to go out and have a procurement exercise for an exemplar design as opposed to a reference design?
Yes. My understanding would be that the exemplar would allow you to go to open market procurement for a greenfield site type development, whereas the reference design allowed us to do that same exercise but on a very constrained site. It also had a considerable advantage of maximising the benefit from all the work that had been done before with the clinical groups around understanding how the building could work or should work, whereas the exemplar design would just be, we'll have outpatients there and we'll have theatres there, not how those two departments move around and connect to one another.
And again, just drawing on your experience, in terms of a procurement exercise, if you had a reference design where you're more detailed in terms of what you're telling the market you want, would that be a shorter procurement exercise as opposed to a concept or exemplar design where you simply say, I want a hospital?
That was our understanding at that point, that it would allow us to proceed through the procurement stages a lot quicker. However, the challenge with that and the balance that's slightly alluded to here, the balance there is that the private sector bidders have got to be able to own the design and, if you like, bring innovation, bring their expertise in order to differentiate themselves between one party and another.
Okay, thanks. If I could ask you, still within the same letter, to move on to page 111, please, to section 4, which is as role of SFT. Do you see that?
Sorry, I missed that.
It's page 111, my lord, section 4, role of SFT. It states, we thought it would be useful to set out what we believe SFT's role to be both in the short term but also more widely during the procurement process. 4.1, procurement strategy. SFT can assist the board in determining the approach that should be taken. In addition, SFT could bring ongoing support to the project via representation on the project board. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, you obviously sat on the project board. Was there a representative from the Scottish Futures Trust that also sat on the project board?
Principally Donna Stevenson, and occasionally Peter Reekie would come and represent SFT, but Donna Stevenson sat on the programme board.
And when you say she sat there, did she sit there in an advisory capacity or a decision-making capacity?
We never got to a situation where there was a vote, so I can't really answer your question, to be honest.
Effectively, there were meetings and she attended those meetings. Is that the most you can say? She attended and
participated in the conversation and quite often followed up afterwards with the correspondence.
Paragraph 4.2, it continues, market interface. SFT's role is to coordinate the wider programme for NPD projects and to communicate the opportunity to private sector bidders to encourage a strong market presence. See that?
Yes.
And it continues 4.3, NPD terms. SFT has a role as the guardian of the commercial position as it relates to the non-profit distribution principles contained within the contract. As part of this role, we could consider with the board and its advisors any changes required to the NPD structure ahead of the procurement. Do you see that?
Yes.
So am I correct in understanding that there's a standard form contract retained by Scottish Futures Trust, and anything that was to be changed from that would have to be agreed?
Correct. I think there is an element where what was called project specifics, where the board was allowed to make a decision on, but the basic contract, absolutely, we couldn't make any amendments. And the we in that case wouldn't just be the health board, it might be the bidders in, etc.
Okay. So again, just at basic level, we've got a very specific contract here.
Yes.
We're not talking about something like an NEC 3 that you'd use for a design and build.
Correct.
If we return then to paragraph 4.4, existing PFI contract, SFT can assist the board with the development of a strategy to resolve any outstanding issues and seek the necessary variations to the existing PFI contract with Consort. The negotiation will be for NHSL. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, that's back to they were assisting with the discussions with the existing revenue funder on the site in Little France.
Yes. SFT could provide comment and such like, but I don't believe they carry professional indemnity insurance to give us advice.
And then it continues at 4.5, financing structure. SFT can support NHSL and its financial advisors in developing the optimal financing structure for the project in order to minimise the financing costs of the project. You see that? And it continues, validation. SFT is likely to have a role in project reviews at key stages during the procurement process. Do you see that?
Yes.
Again, just looking at what's set out in paragraphs 4.1 to 4.6, advice, guidance, assistance, but it doesn't appear that there's any form of technical input that's being provided by Scottish Futures Trust. Was that your understanding?
Apart from the design review, yes.
And then the letter continues, section 5, other issues in preparing for procurement. 5.1, consideration will be needed at an early stage of how much the design should be progressed in-house and how much in competition through the NPD procurement. There's an opportunity with recent accounting rules changes to undertake more design, especially overall massing, adjacencies and even layouts in-house, with the preferred bidder taking on detailed design for construction. Could you just explain what's being said out there in the letter?
I suppose this is where there is a challenge between no input into the design and looking to make sure that the design meets with accounting rule requirements and the procurement. So what's coming in there is the challenge of whether we use the reference, what turned into be the reference design versus any other sort of exemplar design type approach, progressed in-house, meaning within Lothian or with our advisors, and how much is passed to the NPD contractors to bid on. That point I was making earlier about the need for the private sector to bring innovation and design development, so that there was a line to be judged as to where that transfer took place.
Again, at this point, trying to work out just how detailed the reference design would need to be.
Yes.
And then it continues in the final line of page 111, such a move will involve more design work ahead of the procurement, but is overall likely to save time to start on site. Do you see that? And again, is that the point that I've already discussed with you, whereby the more detailed you make the design, potentially the quicker the procurement exercise could be?
Yes, and there was a lot of focus on how much it would cost for bidders to design up and make bids, because there was a wish to not deter any bidder by them having a large cost to design before they were the preferred bidder, etc. And then a very short preferred bidder period to allow them to develop the design.
And then we see still within page 112, if we look down to section 6, programme and resourcing, paragraph 6.1, a dedicated project team will be needed in NHS Lothian to take forward the project. Given the move towards a large revenue-funded project involving private capital and the complexity of the interface issues with the existing PFI contract, we would strongly recommend that individuals are found who have the necessary skills and have experience of PPP procurement. As discussed, NHS Lothian will need appropriate advisory support, financial, technical and legal, to to bring forward a complex NPD procurement. Know that you're looking at existing framework arrangements. SFT is in the early stages of the establishment of an NPD programme with wide advisory framework to support those procuring bodies who wish to participate. This is likely to take until the early summer 2011 to be put in place. Do you see that?
Yes.
In terms of this new revenue-funded project, what was your views in terms of whether NHS Lothian had individuals with the right skill set to take it forward?
We felt that as a team we had enough skills and knowledge and experience. We did feel that we would need good advisory support into some of the detailed work that would be required, and good legal and commercial input into that as well. But as a group, we had experience of operating, managing PFI projects and relatively smaller scale developments of PFI contracts. But we knew the site and the issues, and we had good project managers in the team as well. So.
Were external advisors brought on board?
Yes, we required, and this paragraph alludes to it, you know, there is a need for legal, technical and financial advisors. Legal and financial we wouldn't have used previously to the same extent, so we had to procure those from scratch. The technical advisors, we needed a broader there was a broader requirement from them, from just being project manager and engineering support, etc., cost advisors, to being PFI, NPD experienced individuals able to advise on the project mechanics, the project agreement mechanics.
So again, just to work out where we are in terms of the chronology, that BAM have been appointed, there's been design work that's been completed, there's the change to the revenue funded model, you're not going to be able to use the design and build. There's a recommendation and an acknowledgement, I think you've said, of a need for external advisors. What does NHS Lothian do in terms of getting on board technical advisors?
There was a need to move very quickly, but we clearly had the constraints of procurement rules and board standing financial instructions. So you couldn't go out and just pick someone off the street, so to speak. We had a process to go through. So we looked at the frameworks that were available to us, because SFT hadn't got their framework in place by the time that the programme started. So we needed to utilise our own. The legal profession, the lawyers, we did a tendering exercise for, and I ran that exercise. The financial advisors were procured from a framework, and the technical advisors were also procured from a framework with a number of sub-consultants reporting.
So who was engaged as the technical advisors?
The technical advisors were principally Mott MacDonald.
And what was your understanding of the services they were going to provide?
Sorry, could you say?
What was your understanding of the services they were going to provide?
They were providing both the technical input into the project specification, but also drawing up the technical pack to go into the tendering documents to go out to the marketplace at that time.
So are we talking about architectural design services?
No, no. The architectural design services, sorry, I should have said that in connection with the other bit. The design element we had to review within the Framework Scotland framework to see whether we could utilise that existing design that had been undertaken. and to engage with the designers through what ended up being through the technical advisors.
So
I believe so.
Mott MacDonald are in place, you say, as technical advisors. Who, if anyone, is providing technical assistance in relation to engineering issues?
Mott MacDonald brought technical expertise, engineering expertise. We also had a number of our wider resources from within NHS Lothian, our hard facilities management, estates management colleagues as well were providing input as well.
Okay. Now, I think earlier we'd been discussing the term reference design team, and I'd said we'd come back to it. So now that we're within the revenue funded project, can you explain what you mean by that term reference design team?
That would be the architects, engineers and technical advisors pulling together the reference design output to go into the tendering documents.
Okay.
And that would be managed by the NHS Lothian project team.
Okay. And in terms of a link between the reference design team and, for example, the project board, who's providing that link?
Principally through the project director, Brian Curry.
Okay. Did you have any involvement at that stage as a link?
I was probably more helping and supporting type role rather than directly involved.
Because within your statement, you do mention that whenever Brian Curry becomes involved, you say that you almost take a step back. Just again, so that I'm understanding exactly what you were doing. Yep. Mr. Curry comes in, we're within the revenue-based project, you're still within capital planning. Yep. How active a role do you have?
At this point, more around governance type roles and supporting roles in terms of the help to move to the NPD mindset that's required, that the whole change of focus is required in the legal and commercial context. The business case had to be refocused and rewritten, so I was helping and supporting that side of things.
So, for example, you're sitting on the project board, but is it Mr. Curry that's really dealing with the day-to-day operation of the project?
Correct, yes.
If I could ask you to have a look, please, within Bundle 3, Volume 2, to page 399. This is a letter from Peter Reekie of the Scottish Futures Trust to Jackie Sainsbury of NHS Lothian, dated the 1st of June 2011. Do you see that?
Yes.
And in preparing your statement, did you review this document?
I was certainly aware of it and I'd seen it previously.
So if we could perhaps pick matters up within the letter on page 400, at the first full paragraph on page 400, beginning, as part of an updated key stage review process. Do you see that? So page 400, first full paragraph. As part of an updated key stage review process that will be applied uniformly on NPD projects in the health sector, we propose to engage in the ongoing design process of the project to provide an independent review and challenge to the overall size of the facility and its specification on behalf of the ultimate funder of the project. To do this, we are likely to employ an external advisor. This should provide an independent validation of some of the key high-level metrics of the proposed design and a valuable external benchmark on value for money. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you have any observations in terms of Scottish Futures Trust providing an independent review whenever they were also involved in the project board?
Many of us wear multi-hats. You would have to respond, and you would have to take that up with SFT.
If we could look on, please, to page 405, and at the bottom there's a heading, Capacity and Governance. Page 405, and then the heading Capacity and Governance. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it states, as is set out in the SGHD letter, we believe that the skills and experience of the project director and the wider project team are of vital importance in delivering the project successfully. A key part of this is experience in delivering revenue-funded projects, as this brings significant additional demands on the project team over and above those required on capitally funded construction projects. These include developing a services specification and payment mechanism, attracting and retaining the engagement of equity investors in a project during the bid period, and managing the demands of senior debt funders. Given the size of the project, it is critical that this experience comes from the client team, as the project team have to be able to manage the advisory input to the project, both in terms of cost and strategic input, both of which become very difficult. The advisors themselves are the sole source of experience on key parts of the project. Do you see that?
Yes.
So again, is this SFT saying that there really needs to be people with experience in revenue-funded projects? And I think we've already discussed your views in terms of whether NHS Lothian possess those skill sets.
And we had experience of a number of these areas between the team members already.
But if we look down on page 406, in the paragraph just above Supplementary Agreement 7, you see Scottish Futures Trust stating, overall, we do not believe that the current project team has sufficient experience of PPP project delivery and would look to agree with you a change to this resource at the earliest opportunity, and certainly well before the commencement of procurement. We have offered some part-time support over the next 3 months to temporarily mitigate this concern. Do you see that?
Yes.
Would you disagree with the concerns that are being raised there?
We did, yes.
Was anything done subsequent to this letter to mitigate those concerns?
We did have a secondee into the project for a short while, and then around the same time, I was asked to, and my colleague in Finance Directorate was asked to allocate more time to the project, so I ended up 50 to 80% of my time on the project.
Because what time is this? So just go back up. The letter's dated.
It'd be mid-2011.
Yeah, so the letter's dated the 1st of June 2011.
Yeah.
So you're saying from approximately the middle of 2011, you started to take a more active role in the project again?
Yes.
If we could then just look on for completeness to page 407. Again, we see the role of the Scottish Futures Trust being set out. I won't read it all out, but again, do we see the headings assurance and approvals and project governance? And again, is that all consistent with your understanding of Scottish Future Trust's role?
Yeah, I think that this was very early in the NPD programme, so a lot of these areas were being developed at the time by SFT. So we absolutely recognise the key stage reviews and the programming attached to it, the content in those key stage reviews. We didn't have guidance in advance. We had guidance as we were doing it.
I think a number of witnesses have said to the inquiry that this was really the first time that a revenue-based hospital had been put within another revenue-based project. Was there an element of learning as you went along on this project?
Yeah, we had to get to a situation where we had a thorough understanding of what we were expecting to be tendered to go to the market to procure for the new project, at the same time as we needed to have a thorough understanding of the leverage and commercial position of the PFI the existing PFI. So we had practical in situ PFI and theoretical NPD to be delivered. And as things developed, we had to make changes, but the reference design to an extent helped us, as I mentioned earlier, having some fixed points. But there were 2 or 3 things that absolutely changed as we went through this phase, such as under the capital project, we'd made an assumption and we were heading towards agreeing a single energy centre on the site. Under the NPD, we had to create a separate energy centre for the new hospital because of the risk transfer issues for the NPD. But for the PFI, we had to create and pay for what was colloquially called the docking station, a new build added to the Royal Infirmary that allowed the Royal Infirmary PFI to separate itself from the risk of the NPD. And those emerged after this time, but the reference design helped us get to a fixed point on it.
And again, perhaps to summarise the questions that I was asking before, in terms of everything that's happening in this project, from procurement through to governance, am I right in thinking that there's no precedent to draw upon because this is the first time this type of project's been done in a healthcare setting?
Sorry, I should have just said yes.
One of the issues that you mentioned within your statement is site constraints. Term of reference 10 for the inquiry is to examine whether the choice of site was appropriate or gave rise to an increased risk to patients of environmental organisms causing infections. Now, in terms of term of reference 10, notwithstanding the difficulties that you outline in your statement, did you consider that the choice of site was appropriate for the hospital?
Absolutely, given the key driver was to co-locate the children's services with the adult services. The alternative would have been to up sticks and remove from the Royal Infirmary as well and build 2 new hospitals in one somewhere else. That wasn't feasible.
So again, correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of summarising the issues that you set out in your statement, tight site, quite a bit of enabling works to be done, but not an impossible task.
Well, we did it.
If I could ask you just to look, please, within paragraph 31 of your statement, there's effectively a diagram there. Do you see that?
Yes.
This is called SA6 land and access, and right in the middle we see car park B. So just looking at the site here, what are the buildings that we see in effectively just at the top of the page, just up from car park B? What is that's being shown?
The large building?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, the existing acute site for Lothian and the existing PFI contract. To the left, the large round circle in the middle is the link to what is then the Chancellor's Building and University facilities.
Okay, and we see car park B in the middle. What was to be built in car park B?
That's the site of the children's the project.
Okay. Now you mentioned within your statement both Supplementary Agreement 6 and Supplementary Agreement 7. Could you just explain to the inquiry what had to happen in terms of Supplementary Agreement 6? Why was it important?
What we did with Supplemental Agreement 6 was to remove the land from the existing PFI for that theoretical NPD structure coming in, and also all the rights of access. And by that, I don't just mean the roads and the way into the building, but the drainage connections where the telecoms are, the gas for the power, the electricity, etc. All those rights had to be excised or created with concert.
Because again, another witness to the inquiry said, really in terms of Supplementary Agreement 6, that was about getting control in particular of the land for Car Park B, because quite simply, if you didn't have Supplementary Agreement 6, you didn't have the land that Car Park B sat on, and you couldn't build the hospital. Is that correct?
It is, and in order to create Car Park, in order to ensure that we had both an operating hospital with car parking and an operating PFI with car parking, we had to create a new car park first. That was already underway, but the principle of having somewhere to build a hospital absolutely needed to be agreed. That site was chosen simply because of, well, not simply, the connection to the Royal Infirmary Accident and Emergency was the key adjacency.
And in terms of Supplementary Agreement 7, you explained that involved quite significant enabling works. Again, could you just explain what that involved? Yeah,
we ended up with 2 supplemental agreements, which is just an amendment to the existing PFI contract. One for the land separately from the enabling, because the land was done before procurement and the enabling construction works were done by the time the construction started for the procurement. And that was things like the flood defences. It wasn't that the Royal Infirmary was a flood risk, but it's the planning requirements had changed over time that we needed to upgrade that. We needed to divert the bus route and create new bus stances. We needed to move the medical gases, the VIE plant and such like, as well as doing works inside the Royal Infirmary that created a larger critical care unit to cope with the Department of Clinical Neurosciences coming in. We had to create the connection for an increased pharmacy and pneumatic tube system. I've missed one, the drains, we had to move them as well.
Thank you. If I could ask you to please look within Bundle 3 to Volume 2 and to page 672, please. So that should be the outline business case from 2012. Do you see that?
Yep.
Did you have any input into this outline business case?
Yes, there would have been some sections that I drafted for Sorrell to incorporate into the, Sorrell Cousins to incorporate into the document.
So the inquiry heard evidence from Sorrell Cousins earlier today. She described herself as being effectively the editor of the outline business case. So there was a whole range of individuals that provided information which she would then collate and synthesise into the outline business case itself. And is that consistent with your understanding of how it was created?
Absolutely. And part of my 2 hats in this was I was providing input into certain sections, but also as part of the governance process helping review.
And Ms Cousins stated that the outline business case, it was produced in line with the Scottish Capital Investment Manual. Is that a document you're familiar with?
Yes, SCIM.
And again, just to be clear, you mentioned SCIM. What do you mean by SCIM? Why is it important? What is it?
In order to satisfy the funders, Scottish Government, we have to create the business case, and the Capital Investment Manual is our guidebook for that.
And at this point, if the business case is 2012, Ms Cousins indicated that the guidance that you'd be looking at would be the 2011 version of the Scottish Capital Investment Manual. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did that require there to be a design assessment process that was completed?
Yes.
Do you know if for this project that whether a design assessment process was completed?
It was of a form. It didn't follow the exact template of that was developing at this time of the national design assessment process, and that was partly because of timing. The project had started beforehand, partly due to the programming of the NPD not wanting to delay anything, and partly because there were other assessments being done. And you mentioned the SFT one, that's an example of it. Yes. It wasn't that the project wasn't being reviewed, it just wasn't following the template.
I think at the minute, all I'm trying to establish is if we look within the Scottish Capital Investment Manual, it says that there has to be a design review process that's carried out. And certain witnesses have told the inquiry that their understanding is that that process wasn't carried out. So we can come on and discuss other things that were done. But if you were simply looking at the terms of the Scottish Capital Investment Manual, there wasn't the review set out within that document completed for the project. And would you agree or disagree with that?
Because the project had started prior to the instigation of the NDAP process. Yeah, but that was the prime reason it didn't happen.
To be clear, do you agree or disagree? Did it take place or didn't it?
An NDAP in the form that it was envisaged by SCIM did not happen.
Okay. Now, can you explain who made the decision that what you refer to as an NDAP would not take place?
I believe that would have been through the programme board.
So were you involved in that decision?
Yes.
Okay. And again, could you assist the inquiry with when that decision would have been taken by the project board?
Not off the top of my head. It would have been around the time of the consideration of the reference design discussions. I would have thought.
And if we look back through the minutes of the project board, would you anticipate that there's a minute that addresses that, there being a formal decision that what you referred to as the NDAP wouldn't be done?
I believe so, yes. I couldn't say for 100%.
Can you remember if the project board would have escalated that issue to the actual board of NHS Lothian?
I wouldn't have thought so. It was a technical aspect of the business case.
If I could ask you to look within the business case itself, if we could look on to page 685, please, and to the bottom at paragraph 1.70. You see that? So 1.70, it states, the reference design and development of the final design with the preferred bidder will both be subject to a range of reviews as work progresses. To date, these have included the following, and findings from each have influenced the ongoing design development. Do you see that?
Yes.
And at the bottom it says Health Facilities Scotland NDAP-design assessment. Do you see that? Yeah. From what you said, should the inquiry understand that that's simply an error?
I think that relates to the process that was wrapped around the equivalence of the NDAP, as I would describe it. So it's not clearly stated, it's not correctly stated. It did have a design assessment process.
But again, I just want to make sure that I'm absolutely clear. Whenever it says that Health Facilities Scotland NDAP-design assessment, from what you said previously, there wasn't a Health Facilities Scotland NDAP design assessment, although you've gone on to say that there was an equivalent. But if we're just talking in clear terms, there wasn't the Health Facilities Scotland NDAP design assessment that was done.
That's correct.
So you said that you thought there was an equivalent.
Yeah.
What was the equivalent?
From recollection, I think the equivalent that we had at this time was both the SFT design assessment and the feedback that we got from that from Health Facilities Scotland into the business case consideration at the Capital Investment Group. Just responding to it from a design assessment review.
So when we're talking about the Scottish Futures Trust assessment, are we talking about a report produced by Atkins?
Right. That would be.
Now, you mentioned that there was input from Health Facilities Scotland. Can you recall who was it at Health Facilities Scotland that was providing input?
You used the word feedback, did you?
Yeah, they provided feedback through to the Capital Investment Group and us. The NDAP process was managed by their principal architect, Peter Henderson, but I couldn't say whether he was directly involved with it. I can't recall.
Okay. But again, just so I can understand, you said that there was, I think it was feedback from Health Facilities Scotland. Who or what are they feeding into it? NHS Lothian? Is it an individual or is it a body?
I think I can't recall seeing that feedback directly, but it went to the Capital Investment Group at Scottish Government as part of the business case, which is where the NDAP process would end up anyway.
So if the inquiry wanted to ascertain what feedback, if any, was provided by Health Facilities Scotland on the design for the hospital, what bodies do you think would be able to assist? You mentioned the Capital Investment Group, I think.
Yeah, it's in the bundle, one of the bundles, okay. The document. Couldn't tell you which one, but. Scroll down. Thank you.
Mr. Graham, was there a passage you wanted to draw attention to?
I was just wanting to check what was on the next page in case there was another line that was relevant.
Always a good idea. Sorry.
What was relevant to it. It's like, do not press go, comma, change page, unless you've done.
If I could ask you to have in front of you, please, Bundle 8 and page 63. It was Bundle 8 and page 63. So this should be the Scottish Capital Investment Manual supporting guidance, design assessment in the business case process. Do you see that?
Yes.
And again, were you familiar with that from the
Yes.
time that you were working on the project, feeding into the outline business case?
And my broader work in capital planning.
Yes.
Yes.
So if we look on to page 64, it begins at the introduction. From the 1st of July 2010, an assessment of design quality will become part of the business case approval process. Do you see that? Yep. And then in the final paragraph, just above contents, 3 lines up from the bottom, it says it is intended and expected that boards will develop design statements and utilise the self-assessment methodologies described below on all development projects. Do you see that?
Yes.
Then if we look over the page onto page 65, section 1, design assessment in the business case model, we just read short, 3 lines up from the bottom of that paragraph. It states these are brought together in this process and in the collaboration of HFS and A+DS in the NHS Scotland design assessment process by the means described below. So whenever you'd refer to an NDAP, is that really yes. what we should read short as?
I apologise, we use acronyms all the time.
It's not a complaint, it's just to make sure that we're on the same page. Then section 1.1, a policy and design quality for NHS Scotland requires that the SGHD must provide guidance on compliance with those aspects of statutory and mandatory requirements which are particular to the procurement, design and delivery of healthcare buildings, and guidance on best practice. This will be effected through the support to be provided by Health Facilities Scotland and Architecture and Design Scotland under the tripartite working partnership with SGHD. Do you see that? And then the next paragraph, accordingly, projects submitted to the Capital Investment Group for business case approval will be assessed for compliance with current published guidance. To facilitate this, boards will be requested to submit a comprehensive list of the guidance that they consider to be applicable to the development under consideration, see inset on next page, together with a schedule of derogations that are required for reasons specific to the project's particular circumstances. Now, within the outlined business case itself, is there a comprehensive list of guidance set out anywhere?
I cannot recall. If it was, it would be in one of the appendices.
Okay. But would you accept that there should be, given what we see stated at page 65 there?
Yes, we normally provide a list of the guidance in the outline business case. It normally runs to several pages.
Okay. So if that hadn't happened in the 2012 outline business case, would that be a mistake?
It would be covered elsewhere, either in dialogue with the parties or Scottish Government or some other reason.
Okay. If it wasn't included in the outline business case, would that be a mistake?
I don't think it would necessarily be a mistake. I'm not being defensive, but it might have been agreed that we weren't putting it in for some reason, or it wasn't a requirement from the Capital Investment Group.
This guidance states that boards will be requested to submit a comprehensive list of guidance, but there might be scenarios whereby you simply wouldn't provide that comprehensive list of guidance.
But we weren't following that process for this project because of the timing issue.
Okay. So is that the reason why we don't see it's a timing issue?
I think the timing issue was whether we were following the NDAP process, yes.
Okay. Because if we look over the page onto page 66, it says projects submitted for the business case process will be assessed for compliance with the following, and it states healthcare guidance such as Scottish Health Planning Notes and Scottish Health Technical Memoranda. Do you see that? Yes. And then if we look on to page 67 at the bottom, paragraph 1.3. So page 67, paragraph 1.3, Health Facilities Scotland and Architecture and Design Scotland will provide support to boards in considering design matters in the business case. Staff from HFS and A+DS, supported as necessary by a broader panel, will have the following roles in relation to all projects that are to be assessed. First bullet point, to advise the project team if the standard of benchmarks and self-assessment process being established for the project are in line with policy objectives. To provide an assessment of the design aspects of the project to support the board in their consideration of the business case, and to provide a verification to the capital investment process of the opinion previously given to the board to support the CIG's consideration of the business case. Is that really the whole purpose behind what you referred to as the NDAP?
It's part of that process, yes, absolutely.
And if we look on to page 69 and to the bottom to paragraph 1.4, which is the transitional arrangements, which I think you said in your evidence that you thought that the NDAP didn't necessarily apply because of the timing of the transitional arrangements. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Paragraph 1.4 states, this guidance shall apply to all projects submitted for approval of the initial agreement after 1st July 2010. Projects that have not received approval of their outline business case by 1st July 2010 shall be considered for the assessment process on a case-by-case basis as part of the initial pilot phase. However, the development, demonstrated application of a design statement should be considered as good practice for all projects from publication of this guidance. See that?
Yes.
So again, you explained that you didn't think that the guidance applied. Why not?
I think timing-wise, because we were working off the initial agreement for the sick kids, there was a project-specific dialogue with Scottish Government just to square that away as part of the business case process. So we got, if you like, an exemption or an exclusion.
So did Scottish Government agree that there would be an exemption?
Yes.
And who Scottish Government provided that exemption?
At that time, it would probably have been Mike Baxter. Because at this point, or at the point of the business case that you're dealing with, we were just into the NPD process. So there was the dialogue as to SFT's role, HFS, ANDS, etc.
Okay, but just going back to the discussions that you'd had in the project board, would you accept, given what's stated here, that it's got to be decided on a case-by-case basis? Is that an internal NHS Lothian decision, or is that something that needs to be agreed with Scottish Government?
I think it's a Scottish Government decision because they've got to consider the business case, but it's NHS Lothian, if you like, application. We've got to consider what it is we're doing for the business case.
Do you see that if we looked back, though, to the business case, within the business case, you're being told that the NDAP process has been completed?
Yeah. I think the error that you were identifying there is that we didn't add or equivalent process, the business case words. The principal interest at the time on the design statements was very much about the environment, as in the placemaking and the quality of the building.
If I could ask you to look on to page 75, please. And in the middle of the page, you'll see outline business case. You see that?
Yep.
So it's stage early in the OBC process, an informal consultation on site selection and strategic briefing, considering, and then there's a whole range of things. If we could perhaps look to the last two bullet points, you see that the second last one says list of relevant design guidance to be followed, SHPNs, SHTMs, SHFNs, HBNs, HTMs, HFNs, an activity database. You see that?
Yep.
And it continues, evidence that activity database, ADB, will be fully utilised during the preparation of the brief and throughout the design and commissioning process. You see that?
Yes.
Now again, just thinking back to the entry within the outline business case that states that the full NDAP's been completed, do you think it'd be reasonable if someone read the outline business case to assume that those issues, such as evidence that activity databases will be fully utilised, that was going to be done for this project?
If someone had a detailed understanding of this, then yes.
If I could ask you to look at the Atkins review, please, which you'll find in Bundle 3, Volume 2, at page 567. So when you referred to the review completed by Scottish Futures Trust, is this what you're referring to, the Atkins review?
Yes.
So Bundle 3, Volume 2, page 567. Top left-hand corner, Royal Hospital for Sick Children, Stroke Department of Clinical Neurosciences, Independent Design Review, Scottish Futures Trust, 12th December 2011. If we look on to page 571, please. You see the summary and recommendations, do you see that?
Yep.
It states the purpose of this independent review was to assess the design brief for the project to replace the Royal Hospital for Sick Children in the Department of Clinical Neurosciences on the Little France site. The review assessed the capacity of the project to deliver value for money by meeting the strategic aims of the programme, by making best use of space and opportunities for maximising sharing with other assets, and by minimising the whole life costs. Do you see that?
Yes.
Is this report not aimed at value for money? I think what you refer to in your report is as bankability of the project, as opposed to looking for a design review in terms of compliance with technical standards?
That's certainly what you would take from that summary and recommendation. As you go through the report, you'll see that there are other links to the technical information, but it is at that high level assessment.
In terms of what we looked at in terms of the Scottish Capital Investment Manual and the guidance that it's putting forward, things like schedule of technical guidance that you're going to comply with, that there's going to be an interaction with activity databases. Do we see anything like that within the Atkins review?
Not to that level of detail, no.
So whenever you said that the Atkins review was really the equivalent of what would have happened in terms of the NDAP process, are they not completely different things? They're coming at it from a different perspective, but the end product is an assessment of the design. And in order to build a hospital facility, an acute hospital facility, can't do that design development without reference to all those technical memorandum. But is the Atkins review not really looking at it from the point of view of financing?
Yeah.
And the Scottish Capital Investment Manual looking at it from ensuring that there's technical compliance with relevant guidance?
I think from the NDAP process, it's looking at it from the placemaking and architectural side of things principally, although it does reference those documents, yes.
If we could look on within the Atkins review to page 576, please. Whereby it analyses the reference design. Do you see that approximately 2/3 of the way down the page? The bold heading reference design?
It's coming up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
So page 576, reference design. At the point of our review, the reference design was relatively underdeveloped considering the stage of the project. There was no clear and settled building diagram. This means that, bullet point 1, the clinical adjacencies are not yet wholly resolved. There is not an understanding of how departments can be developed in detail within current blocks. There is no resolved strategy which can be expressed in supporting diagrams for communication routes, segregation of flows of FM servicing. Clarity about these issues will be crucial to the NPD design process to ensure that the facility delivers the desired clinical efficiencies and patient satisfaction. As previously noted, a stated requirement for the emergency department to be adjacent to the output department for the purposes of major incident planning is not currently being achieved. Do you see that?
Yes.
So at this stage of the review, really the assessment is that the reference design is underdeveloped for this stage of the project.
That's certainly what it was saying.
Did you share that view in 2011?
I think when we were discussing this, it would have been in the context of the work that was in hand, but as in what the next stages of the design development was to be or how far we were to take it. My colleague Brian Curry would be better placed to talk about the detail of what was involved here.
Thank you. If I can ask you to look on to page 637, please. So section 7.2.7 on page 637, do you see that?
Yeah.
And if we look to section F in the turquoise colour, do you see engineering?
Yes.
And engineering scored 0 out of 5.
Yes.
Do you see that?
Yes.
And then below that, 7.2.3, scored and unscored elements. A number of elements are unable to be scored at this stage because the design is insufficiently developed. In particular, performance, engineering and construction cannot be scored at this stage. See that?
Yes.
So the insufficient engineering detail for whoever did the report to review it. And it continues, however, some elements which have not been scored are surprising, and then there's some particularly specific examples that are given thereafter. But effectively, the point I was really taking your views on is there's no review in terms of the technical engineering requirements for the hospital within the Atkins review. Is that fair?
Yes, because the design hasn't developed that far, because the reference design hasn't developed that far. It wasn't a detailed design. So the ADET, I wouldn't have expected to have addressed engineering matters.
Okay. And I think you'd asked, maybe find it helpful to see the comments that HFS had provided on the Atkins report. Within Bundle 3, if we could look to Volume 2 and to page 883. So you see at the top of the page, HFS comments on the RHSC/DCN independent design review carried out by Atkins for Scottish Futures Trust. Is this the document that you were thinking of?
Yep.
So Bundle 3, Volume 2, page 883. And below that bold heading, it states the following comments relate to the Atkins independent review dated 12th December 2011. The drawings and detailed information on which the Atkins report was based were not available to HFS other than a set of proposed reference design drawings dated June/July 2011, previously submitted to A+DS for their design review. Do you see that? And then there's various comments that are made. For example, on page 884, we see comments that are being made on the single room issue in relation to recommendation 5. We then see further comments in terms of page 885, either supporting various recommendations that are being made, and again over the page onto page 886.
Yes.
But would you agree again that the comments that are provided there, it's not providing the level of prescription or analysis of technical issues in terms of what we looked at in terms of the Scottish Capital Investment Manual?
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grimm. I don't have any further questions, but Lord Brodie may have questions, or there may be applications from core participants, but thank you. Lord Brodie, I understand that there may have been a Rule 9 application that one of the core participants would like to discuss. I'm conscious that it's nearly 4:15 and the witness has been giving evidence for some time. Perhaps if we were to adjourn for 5 minutes so I could have a discussion, I'd be confident that I could deal with any issues in that timescale.
Very well. First of all, can I confirm that Mr. McGregor is right, that an issue does arise? I'm getting an affirmative from at the back of the room. Mr. Graham, we're going to rise for about 5 minutes. The outcome may be you may be asked another question, or maybe more than one question, but that's the purpose. So we'll rise, but will not go too far. So if Mr. Graham could be taken to the witness room. Oh, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Graham, I've just got a couple of supplementary issues to raise with you. The first would relate to Settlement Agreement 6, which we discussed, which was the requirement to effectively obtain the land. Am I right in thinking that Settlement Agreement 6 and all that it entailed would have been required regardless of whether the project was capital funded or revenue funded?
Correct, yes.
And again, in relation to Settlement Agreement 7, the enabling works that you've addressed, that would have still have been required whether or not the project was capital funded or revenue funded?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. I don't have any further questions.
If I could just ask you one matter, Mr. Graham, it really is for the sake of my notes. You were, well, opinions, you have in front of you again Bundle 8, and it starts at page 63. It's the, Mr. McGregor was asking you about this maybe half an hour ago. And Mr. McGregor drew your attention to the transitional arrangements at page 69. And that indicates that the guidance in this document did not necessarily apply to the Children's Hospital. It's just this second question. Projects that have not received approval of their outline business case by 1st July 2010 shall be considered for the assessment process on a case-by-case basis. It was just to see if I've got a correct note. Now, what I've noted you as having said was that there was a specific dialogue with Scottish Government and the Health Board got an exclusion. Did I note that correctly or not?
Correct, yes.
Yes. And do I take from the word dialogue that might have just been literally a conversation as opposed to something that was documented?
I think we would have confirmed it in email correspondence or written correspondence, but I can't recall 100%.
Thank you very much, Mr. Graham. That's the end of your evidence, and
thank you
very much for coming to assist the inquiry.
Thank you.
Now, my understanding, Mr. McGregor, is that we have witnesses tomorrow, but only after 11 o'clock.
Yes, my lord. The timetabling had indicated that Mr. Graham might have spilled over, but we've managed to complete his evidence today. But Mr. Curry can make himself available from 11 o'clock tomorrow.
Right. Very well. Well, we'll sit again tomorrow, but not until 11 o'clock. So we'll see each other then, and wish you a good evening until then. Thank you.